Well, dear students in Tilburg University and audience online, welcome back to the course of Globalization and Housing Risks of Chinese Young People. This is the third part of this course, Housing Risks of Chinese Young People. If you are interested in these two previous sections, you can check other videos. Let's look at the housing allocation process in socialism system. I'll talk about in the first section that China has a planning economy before the 1980s reform, and it's the planning bureaus instead of autonomous market entities are deciding what to invest and what to produce. And housing construction was deemed as means of consumption rather than means of production, and therefore it was placed second in the planning bureau's agenda. And housing construction is limited, and there is a wide housing shortage problem. Many urban families lived in single-room flats, which has only shared toilets and kitchens. We've seen this picture before. More than 10 families was occupied this courtyard house because there is no enough housing was constructed. Sometimes 3 generations can live in one room, and they have to share this public toilets. The limited housing construction of residential buildings are carried out by public work units and municipalities. And you can see a famous project in Shanghai. It's called the Caoyang Xinchun. Now it looks like this. The complete units was rented to employees with a minimal rent. And who can get the home and how big the home it is did not decided by how much they can pay, but on a series of criteria, and that was decided by the planning bureau, which depends on like how contributive you are to the society. So here in this table, you can see the distribution standards of public organization in 1955 in this slide. When an individual has a higher position here in this hierarchy, and they can be allocated a larger office and a large housing quota per person. Then it depends on how much persons there is in the family, so they know how big the apartments they can be allocated. And the rent of this of a smaller apartment or a big apartment does not vary much. Now let's look at what's happened in the housing reform. The reform process is very complex, and the different housing tenures was provided in different periods, and the policies in each period are also different to focus on different goals. But one of the main strain is to transfer the housing tenure from public rented, like these blue um, blue bars, to privately owned housing tenures, like these three red bars shows. And also another important goal is to transfer the way of allocation from administrative ranking to buying, like to market transactions. And real estate developers supersede work units as main housing providers. And welfare housing from employers are no longer available, and now almost all young adults who wish to move out their parents' home and establish an independent household have to buy a commodity housing from the market, and those subsidized tenures are very limited in these tables. So this table shows a collection of housing distribution status in different years, and this was collected from other literatures. So because this slide was not prepared for online use, so I didn't attach the references here, but it can be found in the explanation, or I think it's very easy for you to look for the references. So the percentage of public rental housing peaked in 1978, so before the reforms, and then kept declined to 28%, and then even lower in 2011. It's not only due to a sale of public housing to sitting tenants, like what happened in the Netherlands and in UK, but it's also due to its stagnation of public housing construction compared to the rapid growth of owner-occupied housing. And the percentage of private-owned housing is merely 35% in 1949, then declined to 25% in 1978, and it reached around 15% in 1996 and kept increasing to 75% in 2000. So here in total, about 75% in 2011. Housing price increased very rapidly in China. You can see the blue line in this graph. It increased 10% or even 20% sometimes like annually. And this rapid appreciation of housing value is linked closely to the process of globalization and the free flow of capital all over the globe. Because this line shows the increase of broad money, so M2. Um, because Chinese economy is largely depend upon exports, and it has to keep the currency exchange rate competitive. The Chinese government apply active monetary policies to peg the exchange rate Chinese yuan to peg the exchange rate of Chinese yuan to US dollars, so to make sure the price of its products are attractive to international buyers. And therefore, when United States government ordered to issue more US dollars, the Chinese banks have to match it. Okay, it's Federal Reserve, right? And the financial industries are also developed, and policies to facilitate capital flows are initiated to respond to the needs of international trades and foreign investment. Now let's look at the determinants of young people's housing opportunities. So in different periods, housing researchers ask about who has more opportunities to live in better housing conditions and what are those people's attributes. In the welfare period, it's the senior, married, and the families with large size are more likely to be allocated housing and better and bigger housing. And in welfare and dual period, the membership of Communist Party of China and the cadres, which equivalent managers and government officials, and the higher administrative ranking in the hierarchy system, those people are more likely to have the chance to buy a home with large subsidy. But after the market reform started and commodity housing started to dominate the market, and this is the socialist Victor Ni, who proposed a market transition theory, and this theory suggests that in the transition process from a redistributive economy to a market economy, the stratification mechanisms which decide who gets better opportunities will also move from redistributive variables to market variables such as income and occupation. I tested this theory in my own research using data from Chinese General Social Survey data from 2010. The results show that all these market variables are insignificant in predicting young people's opportunity to become homeowners. But then what are the significant variables? These are the three types of redistributive variables. And I found that the CPC, the Chinese Communist Party membership of the parents is significant, and the hukou type and hukou site is important. So some of you might heard about the term of hukou. It's a special household registration system in China, which tied up an individual's welfare access to his or her status of residence at birth. So therefore, one's hukou type, rural or urban, and one's hukou site, local or migrant, were all redistributive variables which are decided at the time of birth. And in sociology, we also call it ascribed status, right? Um, so my research showed that the redistributive variables rather than market variables determines Chinese young people's opportunity to become homeowners, which is the indicators of better housing conditions and an ownership of assets. But this finding is somewhat different from findings in other studies which use the all-age Chinese urban residents as research objects. And why is that? Why only young people? I believe it's because under the background of high housing prices, the savings for young people are not enough. And for people who achieved home ownership in young age, they must rely more on the assets accumulated by their parents in previous decades instead of their own incomes in past several years. Therefore, the attributes of the family backgrounds had more significant influences on young people's home ownership. That insight is not enough for research, right? So in the second half of my PhD research, I looked into the role of housing intergenerational transfers. There is in-kind transfers, which is for the parents to allow the students, to allow the young people to live in their homes for free. But in my research, I focus more on the financial transfers, which is using parents' financial contributions to help children to acquire home ownership. Because I think this is all not only a way to help their young people to save time and money, but it can help to build up the children's assets immediately. So Chinese society is characterized with a high level of participation in housing intergenerational transfers. Although the national data is absent, but surveys in individual cities shed light on the prevalence. In Beijing, 17% of young homeowners used financial transfers from their parents. And the percentage is higher if we focus on the locals. So in another survey, also in Beijing, 80% of the local respondents received the transfers from their parents, and 28% of them received transfers for the whole price paid by their parents. In Nanjing, which is a capital city in Jiangsu province in South China, 72% of local young adults received the transfers, in contrast of 64% of the migrants do so. 52% of the property value is paid by parents' transfers for the local young adults, while there is only 26% of the property value was paid to the migrant young people. In my own research, I applied a qualitative method. So I did interviews in the city of Chongqing, which is a second-tier city in the middle of China, which is also the city where I was born, where I was currently working. So it looked like this before the reform, and now it's a modern metropolitan area with a lot of skyscrapers and good public facilities. I did 31 in-depth interviews to both parents and adult children to understand their own experiences on receiving and providing international transfers. The participants were selected by a purposive sampling method under the principle of maximum diversity. I targeted and characterized three groups of young people: the local urbans, the urban migrants, and the rural migrants. So urban migrants means the young people who moved from another urban areas to Chongqing. Often it's from a less developed, smaller cities. And the rural migrants means means people who moved from countryside to Chongqing, and some of them, and all of them were born with a rural hukou, but now some of them has transferred and have an urban hukou now. And I also interviewed parents. With each group, we recruit a sample with maximum diversity in terms of age, gender, occupation, education, income level, and housing and living arrangements. So I try to find people who are received transfers and who do not receive transfers, and parents who did transfers and did not make transfers. But these numbers are not representative. This patrilineal system and patriarchal power relations had been partially weakened in the socialist era, but now is having a coming back after the reform, as many welfare and resources allocations was given up by the public sector, and the families and private sectors are taken over. Now, finally, let's look at the social coordination framework. In this course, you have also learned about the welfare state, right? In my research, I use this graph to show the interconnectedness of the welfare state, family reciprocity, and home ownership. There is a trade-off between welfare state and home ownership because tax contributions to pension schemes and private spending on home ownership are mutually exclusive for families to offset their long-term risks. Other things being equal, the more one pays for social security contributions, the less one can afford for housing purchase and vice versa. And there is also a trade-off between state and families as welfare providers. The former resource relied on services purchased from professional institutions and paid by public funds, whereas the latter depends on help from individuals with no monetary compensations for the service. In countries where public pensions are more generous, the elderly tend to be independent of their offspring, particularly in financial terms. On the other hand, in countries where public expenditure on social security is low, intergenerational support is more common. In developing countries where social protection is underdeveloped, extended and joint families are common ways of residence and the main source of welfare and protection for individuals. The trade-off between state and family in welfare provision also works the other way round. In developed countries with family-oriented culture, such as in East Asian countries like Japan and South Korea, the development of the welfare state is confined, and family reciprocity includes the reciprocity within like one generation, like between husband and wife. The state policies expect these families members to help each other, and instead of to develop a better functioning like social care institutions. So on the basis of the two trade-off outlined above, a widespread intergenerational transfer in home ownership and the consequent phenomenon of reciprocity can be expected. Individual families are forced to own a home as a source of private safety net, and since demand is rigid, housing prices will rise or at least remain stable, and making housing a very attractive investment, even for those who do not need accommodation. So, and in general, a large lump sum payment is required as a mortgage down payment. So first-time home buyers would have to seek financial help, most likely from families and close friends who would not ask for collaterals and whose term might be more flexible. And families and friends are willing to pool resources together so that they can derive more benefits from the never-falling housing market. So this model works best for parents and adult children, as the former have savings and the latter have future earning powers. And gender is independent dimension in this framework, and there can be a distinguished gender division in any of the three elements of the framework. You have probably learned in this course or somewhere else that the welfare state in North Europe is the most gender neutral because the governments there provide childcare, encourage employment of women so that women can maintain a household by themselves. But in the rest of the developed world, women to some extent are treated as dependent of their husband and access welfare mainly as family members of the males. And Japan is an extreme case for this situation. So in my own research, I have showed to you how the family reciprocity between the seniors' aged care and the young adults' housing need is carried out along the line of the sons. Therefore, in China, males are in an advantaged position to receive housing intergenerational transfers, and the ratio of male homeowners is much higher than the ratio of female homeowners. But then the Chinese males have a higher pressure to give up money to buy a home, and that becomes a burden of many families with male children. So based on the explanation of this framework, I present two ideal type of social coordination. The type 1 is characterized by close intergenerational relationships between generations, where they have intense exchanges in financial, instrumental, and emotional support. And they have a tenure-biased housing system with a dominance of home ownership and a residual welfare state and a division of gender roles. And type 2 is characterized by relatively independent intergenerational relationships, a tenure-neutral housing system, which different housing tenures are all emphasized. And there is an adequate provision and comparable rights in the rental and home ownership sector. And then there is also a generous welfare state to both old and young, and there is no gender divisions. Type 2 social coordination differs from type 1 in that part of the resources, like the income of wealth produced by the citizens, is derived beyond the boundaries of the families and is redistributed on the larger scales. And this scaling up the coordination helps modern states to facilitate investment and development, offset risks, and improvement of the well-being of the population. So I call it modern social coordination. And each country have their own specific configurations of the 4 dimensions, which eventually merge to form different style of social coordinations. This is all for this lecture, and we do not have a Q&A section, but you are welcome to leave your comments and questions below, and I will try to respond to them when time is available. Thank you very much.